Hello again, everyone. John Flynn here from Flynn Real Estate, serving Southern Ontario, based out of the Niagara region. Thank you all once again for tuning in this week. First, I want to start off with talking to all the potential buyers that have been waiting on the sidelines. And this is mainly towards the people waiting to get into the market. You've been patiently waiting for that next leg down, wondering if it was the right time. Did you miss it? And I can say you didn't miss it. The best case scenario is that you would be breaking even right now. And that's over the last 2.5+ years, probably 2 years and 9 months back into late 2020 at this point. So let me explain. You haven't missed the boat, and we're still heading down with prices. So it's only going to get better from here on in. So looking at this first chart here, if you had a bought at either of these bottoms, so the first bottom here would have been in December 2020. The price was around 610,000. This is based on the average price in Canada. Or if you had a bought this year in January 2023, when TIF did the interest rate pause, and that was the bottom, as many people were calling it, you would be barely better than break even given July's latest data, which is outdated data at this point, right? Because we're almost at the end of August. And so far in August in Ontario, we've dropped about 2.5% to 3%, 20 to 30,000, depending on your area. So again, this is from July. The average price was 668,000, the average sale price in Canada. And if you were to sell, you'd have 30,000 in real estate fees, 10,000 in land transfer tax, 5,000 in lawyer, closing, and moving costs. And this doesn't even take into account any penalties from a mortgage that you would have. So the difference in price was 56,000 from if you bought at the bottom to now. So it has gone up. It is up from the bottom, $56,000, or should I say the most recent bottom. And of course, technically, you would be just a little bit better than break even, but you're pretty much break even for the last 2.5 years on this scenario. Now let's move forward to the August numbers, which aren't out nationally, but I have a good estimate, again, based on the Ontario numbers. So the August estimate is down another 3% or 2.5% to 3%. I use 2.5% in this scenario. That's down to 651,000 for the average national price, 29,000 in real estate fees, 9,500 in land transfer tax, and 5,000 in lawyer, closing, and moving costs. So that adds up to over $43,000, $43,500 to be exact, in expenses and fees if you were to sell at this point. And taking into consideration that you did buy at the lows of 612 or 610,000, we are up 39,000 from that. So of course, the increase in price does not cover the expenses it would take you to sell. So you would be again around that break even, but the best case scenario, knowing that you bought at these lows in the last 2 years and 9 months or so. Now this is the best case scenario. I'm trying to be optimistic. Of course, the worst case scenario, it's sky's the limit from there. So only if you bought at the lows in the last 2 years and 9 months, you would be break even. Anything higher than that, any other month besides January 2023 and December 2020, you're losing money. And of course, that depends on where you bought, when you bought, and how much higher did you pay from where we are now. So anyway, I just wanted to put all the minds at ease for the people that thought they missed the boat again. You haven't missed the boat for the last 2 years and 9 months, approximately. Moving on to home ownership rates in Canada. They're declining. They've been declining now for a few years. Stats Canada releases this information. They do it based on the census info. So it's not a yearly thing, although there are yearly numbers out there, but I'm going with the Statistics Canada and their actual press release, or their report that they released after 2021, the last time we had a census. So here is the home ownership rate map in Canada, and you can see 2011 was the more yellow part, and the lighter yellow is 2021. And almost all areas besides Northwest Territories, but all areas are down. And the rate of home ownership is down 2.5% on average nationally. Now, I just wanted to take a few lines or a few key points from the report that they had released. The link is in the description, but just some key highlights to show you kind of where the numbers are at. The proportion of Canadian households who own their home or the home ownership rate, 66.5 in 2021, is on the decline after peaking in 2011 at 69%. The growth in renter households, up 21.5%, is more than double the growth in owner households. It's only up 8.4%. That's almost triple. So, of course, our population has increased, but the growth in rental households is 22%, and the ownership increase is only 8.4%. So pretty big difference. There's, of course, a lot more people renting than buying in the last 10 years or so. Now, looking at the newer builds, a large share of newer builds are rentals. Recently built dwellings are increasingly likely to be occupied by renters. 40.4% of the housing built in the last 5 years, ending in 2021, was tenant occupied. The highest tenant rate next to that of dwellings built in the 1960s post-war apartment boom at 44.5%. So that's a pretty significant number. That number that was higher was post-war, and that was from the apartment boom. Now we're like the next step closest to that. So it's pretty dramatic. In Canada's CMAs, and that's metropolitan areas, condominiums are made up of 39.9% of the occupied stock in the primary downtowns in 2021, and half of these downtown condos were being rented out by investors. So not a big surprise. Investors, buying all those pre-sale condos, renting them out. And I think that number is low. I think it's more than half. It's probably like 60%. But that's, again, significant numbers. It just goes to show you where and who has been buying these units. Now, before I finish up on this report with some more numbers, I just want to tell you a couple of stories. These are recent stories. Now, this has happened a whole bunch. This happens all the time, actually. But the first one, I wasn't involved in. It was on my street. It was an old guy, lived at the corner. He's lived there since like 1975. He, was first owner of this house. And anyway, he has to move. He's getting old. His wife is getting old, and health reasons. So they put it up for sale. There's another agent on my street. They use the agent. They're really good friends. A buyer finally comes along. The buyer was actually local too, and the buyer happened to be a real estate agent. And they said, we want to make sure it's a good family in this house. And they said, oh, yes, it's our family. We're buying the house. My mother's going to live there, blah, blah, blah. Closing day comes, the house closes, and there's a bunch of students with shopping bags standing on the driveway waiting for the owner to come with the key. Of course, the agent, she lives on the street, and now she's going to look bad because the neighbors are going to say, what is this rental property now? We have all these students here. And which isn't a big deal if they take care of the house. But of course, now it's been a month or two later, drywall going in, making all sorts of rooms in the basement, not taking the garbage out, grass is a foot or so long. So it's a really bad sign. But the buyer, which is also an agent, lied. They knew they had to lie. They probably would have sold them the house anyway, but why do they have to lie to buy this house? Because they know that people frown on this, and they don't want rentals or student rentals popping up in their nice family neighborhoods. Another one was a deal I just did on a townhouse in Niagara Falls. The buyer made a point at the home inspection to tell the seller. The seller stuck around because they have dogs and whatnot. And the buyer said, oh, this is a great house. I'm moving in. Whatever job he was, small talk. But he made a point to tell her, I'm moving in. Anyway, the house closes. Next thing, it's on MLS for rent. Like, he had no intentions of moving in, but for some reason they felt the need to mislead the sellers to tell them, yes, no, this is for me, the house. So they know that, people frown upon this. They don't want their family homes turned into rentals. Nobody does. They prefer a nice family in their house. But so they know this, and they're lying. They're telling people whatever they have to do, beg, borrow, and steal to get this rental property. And again, this is why we're in this situation. It's lying and greed and all the rest of it. I have no problem with investors buying purpose-built rentals or building them. But when you're buying up single-family homes and people are going without, I have a problem, and I think most people would have a problem. Anyway, moving on to the last of this article, Canada's homeownership rate, 66.5% in 2021, ranked 23rd highest among the countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Canada was below the OECD average of 71.5%. So kind of misleading the way they report on this, saying they're the 23rd highest in the OECD. There's only 38 countries in the OECD. So, that's like me saying I'm 23rd highest out of 50 agents in August that sold whatever many number of homes. It's nothing to brag about being 23rd highest, especially when there's only 38 other countries in it. But anyway, I thought it was funny. But we're well below average. The average is 71.5%, and we're at 66.5% for home ownership rate. Looking at this number, that 66.5% on a chart going back to 1971, you can see that it started to really increase in the 90s. And of course, we plateaued in 2011 and we're headed down quick. And while we're on the OECD, here is the real household income per capita for those countries, or for the major countries. And you can see Canada, this is a year over year, I believe, Q1 2023 versus Q4 2022. We had negative growth of over 2% per capita. And you can see the average there is just under 1%. United States, they're just under 2%. So Canada really not doing too well on the economic side. And in comparison, the United States, 65.5% rate, which was fairly close to Canada, but Mexico, 69.6%, had the highest homeownership rate in North America. And that was really surprising to me, knowing that, in Mexico, they make a lot less money per person. Their wages are a lot lower. They usually have less or lesser quality of life, but their home ownership rate is higher than both Canada and the United States. So a pretty interesting fact there. Anyway, that's going to be it for this week. But as always, let me know in the comments what you think. And again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.